This is a brief lecture that introduces the course called Exegesis of Romans. I'm Professor Rollin. One of the initial questions we need to ask when we interpret Paul's letters, and particularly Paul's letter to the Romans, is how do we understand what Paul is doing? And there will be a considerable amount said about Paul the missionary author and Paul the theologian in this course, as in much of the literature. But I also want to bring out the importance of Paul the exegete in the course, which I think sometimes is not given enough attention and nevertheless answers some very significant questions. We need to pay more attention to how Paul is using the Old Testament, not just applying an Old Testament verse to a point that he's making as kind of a proof text. Paul's actually functioning as an exegete in the epistle to the Romans. We'll be using several textbooks for this purpose. One is one that I'm writing during the course entitled Essays on Romans. It's a collection of separate essays. Our commentary for this course is going to be the fairly new commentary by Frank Thielman on Romans from the Exegetical Commentary on the New Testament series. And then I'm going to have you read most of James Ware's new book, Paul's Theology in Context, Creation, Incarnation, Covenant, and Kingdom. There are a few sections in that book that apply more to 1 Corinthians, and we won't be reading those. At the end of the course, you will need to state that you have read these books thoroughly, completely. That involves taking notes as you read. And note from the syllabus that not completing this work will lead to a reduction in your course grade. And let me just say at this point, read the syllabus. Don't proceed with the course until you've read the syllabus. This course involves Greek translation work, your own work from the Greek text. You need to copy the Greek in one column of a table. In the middle column, you need to note here and there what some sources are for your exploring the Greek and how to translate it. That would involve references to the commentary, for example, or other reading on the course, or some further work with tools like the lexicon BDAG or some other grammars, some translation aids. You don't have to overdo it with this, but your work on the course should involve applying what you have learned in interpreting the New Testament to this course in exegesis. In other words, you should be using tools for translation at this point in your work. And then the final column is your translation and any additional notes about your translation. In tutorials, which will meet weekly, and most weeks will have some translation involved in it, you can use your middle column for some references to aids, but you're not to read your translations in class. You're to translate from the Greek text itself. Note that students in exegesis courses must pass the Greek component of the course in order to pass the course itself. Just because the value of this part of the assignments for the total grade is not, say, near 50%, and therefore would be a pass or fail, doesn't mean that you can skip it or not do well in it and still pass the course. There are going to be lectures that are online in this course. You are to listen to all the lectures, of course, and take careful notes on them. That means you can't listen to the lecture while driving. And you will need to look at the slides because they are narrated PowerPoint lectures like this one. You are also to prepare questions from your work in the lesson for the tutorial and arrive ready to ask them and engage with others in fruitful discussion that is also a learning opportunity. So don't arrive at a tutorial without anything to contribute. You should be fighting for time in the short time we have together in a tutorial to get your question up or your takeaway point that you thought was worth sharing out onto the floor. Papers are required for this course. One paper will be on a theology of Romans topic. See more about that from the syllabus. And then there's an exegesis paper. You'll have an option. You might write on Romans 5, 12 through 21, or Romans 9, 30 through 10, 13. And depending on which option you choose, the due date will be earlier or later. So have a look at the syllabus at that point as well. I've mentioned tutorials already. The approach to my courses and this course is to meet together for tutorials. The only time that we meet together at the same time face to face, and that will be over Zoom, will be in tutorials. Everything else will be done on your own when time permits during the week for you. You work it into your schedules. So we'll be divided into some groups. The whole class is not meeting all together on a certain day. See the syllabus for that, and then also you'll be contacted to be put into a group. There's an aspect to a tutorial that's different from a discussion group. A discussion group tries to process the material and often focuses on application and relevance and so forth. Our purpose in the tutorials is further learning. And so while we might do some of the other, these should be learning experiences, hence the word tutorial. Questions and discussion of the lectures and reading are part of this. I've mentioned being prepared to contribute along those lines right from the beginning when a tutorial starts, not thinking during a tutorial, what kind of question might I ask or where might I jump in, but you should be ready to go. And then there will be some translation of the text. Translation takes a long time, and so we want to do some of that, but your primary work showing that you've worked through this and been prepared for it will be done before the tutorial. And once again, as I've already said, no passive observation in the tutorials. Be ready to speak up. Now I want to conclude this brief introduction to our course by pointing out some emphases that I want you to look out for. I have a certain take on Romans, and this is where I want to present to you right at the beginning of the course some of the things that I'll be emphasizing. They are probably all controversial, and so the goal is to hear what I'm saying and how I'm arguing for my views over against what others are saying and what reasons they give. So here they go over the next few slides. First of all, I argue that Romans is both an occasional missional letter and a theological essay. In it, we get an exposition of the gospel itself that also spoke to the issues of Paul's day and of the church at Rome. Secondly, the theological problem Paul solves in Romans is not simply how are sinners justified, but how are sinners made righteous. And I think in saying this, I'm arguing against the most usual way in which people are reading Romans. Paul's understanding then is of a grace that is both forgiving grace and transforming grace. Those terms are my terms, and I'll be using them in this course. Paul's theology is not only about justification, but also about participation in Christ. Paul understands the work of Christ and the Spirit as a power of salvation that is life-changing. Romans 7:7-25 has been misread by most Protestants for centuries. So those are several things that I've said under that second point, but they all relate together. And they all relate to reading Romans as answering the question, how are sinners made righteous? A third emphasis in this course that I have is this. The most fruitful way to read Romans is as an exegetical study through Paul's use of the Old Testament. Isaiah 58-60 is particularly significant, though Paul typically links several texts on the grounds of 2 or 3 witnesses to make an exegetical argument. And so what I'm saying here is that read Romans as Paul the interpreter. But I'm also saying that Isaiah 58-60 for me is a particularly significant portion of Isaiah that helps us understand Paul's theology. And it's not only where he quotes from that section, but also where the theology of Isaiah is also the theology of Paul. We know Paul uses Isaiah in Romans, and so the question isn't whether he knows the text. It's sometimes, though, that people focus on whether he's quoting or alluding to a specific text. My argument is a bit broader than that, that while he does reference Isaiah 59 on a few occasions, the theology of Isaiah 58 is actually quite close to what we find in the theology of Romans. And so I'm going to be exploring that in this course with you. And then reading Paul in light of Greco-Roman literature is very fruitful for understanding him and provides some obvious answers to questions interpreters keep asking because they simply haven't read enough. For example, on the question of homosexuality in Romans 1. And what I've found over the years is that scholars, including commentators on Romans, are often deficient in their knowledge of the Greco-Roman literature and therefore make some obvious exegetical mistakes. And it's particularly on the issues of sexuality around the words we find in Romans 1:24-27, and then also in what Paul says about desire, epithumia. Some further emphases. Romans helps correct a popular error in churches today that wants to understand Christian ethics as only about actions and not desires. Otherwise put, Romans is an exposition of the new covenant. Those are two very different ways of getting at related ideas. But what Paul is interested in is not just stop doing sinful things, but he's about being transformed through the power of the gospel at work in us. Another emphasis is that Romans involves a corporate and individual theology. The corporate reading needs to be emphasized because it has been underemphasized so much over a very long period. Romans has often been read individualistically. This also means that Romans provides us with more than a soteriology, answering the question, how might I be justified? It provides us with an ecclesiology. How is God forming a people for himself in a sinful world? And finally, an emphasis that I have on this course is that Romans also answers a new error in our day that has entered the church through the Western, postmodern, post-Christian culture. God's universal plan is not the pursuit of agendas of diversity, but finding unity in Christ. And that makes a major difference. So we'll be exploring these emphases in this course, along with having the focus of just understanding the text of Romans together. I hope you enjoy the course and look forward to interacting with you in the tutorials. Get started now and start with reading the syllabus.